My best friend waved goodbye to me on a Friday afternoon. By Sunday, she was buried under a basement floor, and her killer sat 3 desks away from me, drinking coffee like nothing happened. That's just the first story. The second involves a coworker who was rehearsing my murder while I worked overtime. And the third? She broke through my window at midnight, calling me by the nickname she gave me, the Rat. These are 3 true workplace nightmares, and after you hear them, you'll never look at your coworkers the same way again. I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. It was 1992. There were no cell phones in our pockets. No way to track someone's location. No social media to check when they were last online. If you called someone's landline and nobody picked up, that was it. You just didn't know where they were. That kind of disconnection, that helplessness, is what haunts me most when I think about what happened to my friend. I was 24 years old, fresh out of college, and desperate for work. The economy was brutal back then. Landing a steady paycheck felt like winning the lottery. So when a small distribution company in Ohio offered me a position, I took it without hesitation. The office sat in the middle of an industrial park, the kind of place that buzzed with delivery trucks during daylight hours, but transformed into a ghost town the moment the sun dropped below the horizon. Fluorescent lights, worn carpet, the smell of cardboard and printer ink. There were maybe 15 of us in that building. And at the top sat a man I'll call Marcus. Marcus was the owner. Late 40s. Heavy-set. He wore cheap suits that always carried the faint scent of stale cigarettes masked by breath mints. On paper, he seemed harmless enough, quiet, reserved, kept to himself. But there was something about the way he moved. He walked on the balls of his feet, completely silent. You'd be typing away at your desk, lost in thought, and suddenly you'd feel warmth on the back of your neck. You'd turn around, and there he was, standing inches behind your chair, watching you with those flat, unblinking eyes. It made your skin crawl in a way you couldn't quite explain. And then there was Tiffany. God, I still think about her. Tiffany was our receptionist. 22 years old, blonde hair she usually wore in a ponytail, and the kind of genuine warmth that made everyone feel welcome. She was the first real friend I made at that company. During lunch breaks, we'd sit together in her beat-up Honda Civic with the windows cracked, eating sandwiches and complaining about the ancient filing system. On nice days, we'd find a spot on the curb behind the warehouse, letting the sun warm our faces while we talked about music, about our futures, about all the things young people talk about when they still believe the world is mostly good. For the first 6 months, everything felt normal. Then the conversations changed. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Because what I'm about to tell you still gives me nightmares 20 years later. It started slowly. I began noticing Marcus around Tiffany's desk more than seemed necessary. Our office had an open layout, but Tiffany sat near the front entrance, slightly separated from the rest of us. Marcus's office was at the back of the building, yet somehow, he spent half his day hovering near the reception area. He'd lean over her shoulder to check the schedule, positioning himself so close that his chest nearly touched her back. I'd catch him standing in his office doorway, coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips, staring at her with an intensity that made my stomach turn. It wasn't a casual glance. It was the look of someone who was calculating something. One Tuesday evening in early November, Tiffany asked if I wanted to grab dinner after work. Something in her voice sounded off, strained, almost fragile. I said yes immediately. We ended up at a diner a few miles from the office. Tiffany ordered a soda but barely touched it. Her hands trembled when she lifted the cup. Her face had gone pale, almost gray under the fluorescent diner lights. "Hey," I said softly, leaning across the table. "What's going on? Talk to me." She glanced around the restaurant, checking every booth, every face, as if she expected someone to be listening. "It's Marcus." The words tumbled out of her like water breaking through a dam. It had started with comments about her appearance. He'd tell her she looked ripe or healthy, words that felt wrong in ways she couldn't articulate. Then he began manufacturing reasons to keep her late. He'd insist she stay until 6 or 7 to wait for deliveries that never materialized. But yesterday was different. "I was in the supply closet," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "getting toner for the printer. I heard the door open behind me. When I turned around, Marcus was standing there." She paused, and I watched her swallow hard. He closed the door. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, blocking the exit. I could feel his breath on my face. Then he asked me if I was happy with my paycheck. Her eyes glistened with tears she was fighting to hold back. When I tried to leave, I had to squeeze past him. He pressed himself against me. On purpose. I felt, she couldn't finish the sentence. I felt rage surge through my chest. Tiffany, you have to go to the police. What he's doing, that's not just harassment. That's assault. She shook her head so violently that strands of hair escaped her ponytail. I can't. You don't understand. My mom is sick. Really sick. If I lose this job, we lose our apartment. We have nothing. Then quit. Walk away. It's not safe there. He owns the company, she said, her voice cracking. He's connected. Everyone in the local business association knows him. Who's going to believe a 22-year-old receptionist over a respected business owner? I reached across the table and grabbed her hand. At least promise me you're looking for something else. I am. She squeezed my fingers. I swear. The second I get another offer, I'm gone. Stay with me. Because what happened next broke something inside me that's never fully healed. For the rest of that week, I watched Tiffany like a hawk. I positioned my chair so I could see her desk from my cubicle. I made excuses to walk past reception multiple times a day. Strangely, Marcus seemed to have backed off. He was agitated, pacing his office, snapping at the warehouse crew over minor mistakes, but he appeared to be avoiding Tiffany entirely. Maybe he got scared, I thought. Maybe he realized he'd gone too far. I let myself believe that. Friday came. It was one of those cold, gray November afternoons when the rain falls so hard it sounds like static. By 5 o'clock, everyone was rushing to their cars, eager to escape. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the exit. Tiffany was at her desk, pulling on her coat. See you Monday, she called out, flashing me a smile. But the smile didn't reach her eyes. They looked tired, scared. Be safe driving, I said. Roads are awful out there. I watched her walk across the parking lot, her umbrella fighting against the wind. I watched her climb into her Honda Civic. I watched her taillights disappear into the rain. That was the last time anyone ever saw Tiffany alive. I need you to understand how this felt. Drop a like if you've ever lost someone and didn't get to say a real goodbye. Monday morning, 8:15. Tiffany's desk sat empty. At first, I assumed she was running late, traffic, maybe, or car trouble from the storm. But by 10 o'clock, worry started spreading through the office like a virus. Tiffany was never late. In the 8 months I'd worked there, she hadn't missed a single day. I walked to Marcus's office. The door was open. He was sitting behind his desk, reading a newspaper, a cup of coffee steaming beside him. He looked completely calm. Mr. Marcus, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Have you heard from Tiffany? She's not at her desk. He didn't look up from the paper. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his coffee. Then finally he raised his eyes to meet mine. Oh, Tiffany? His voice was flat, emotionless. She called me over the weekend. She quit. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. She quit. Personal reasons. He shrugged. Family emergency. Said she had to move out of state immediately. It's a shame. She was a good typist. I stood frozen in his doorway, my heart pounding against my ribs. She didn't mention anything to me, I said carefully. We're close. She would have said goodbye. Marcus's eyes narrowed. His face went cold. People keep secrets, son. Now get back to work. We have orders to fill. I walked back to my desk on legs that felt like rubber. It was a lie. I knew it in my bones. Tiffany wouldn't leave without telling me. She wouldn't abandon her sick mother and move out of state on a whim. Something was wrong. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. That night, I called her apartment. The phone rang and rang until an answering machine picked up, but the tape was full. No one had been checking messages. Tuesday after work, I drove to her building. Her parking spot was empty. I knocked on her door until my knuckles ached. No answer. No sign of life. I wanted to call the police. I wanted to scream that something had happened to her. But doubt crept in like poison. What if Marcus was telling the truth? What if some emergency really had forced her to leave? I was young and scared and terrified of causing a scene over nothing. So I convinced myself to wait. 2 months passed. The office atmosphere grew toxic. Marcus hired a temp, an older woman who never spoke to anyone. Marcus himself became increasingly erratic. Some days he was manic, laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny, slapping people on the back with forced enthusiasm. Other days, he'd lock himself in his office from morning until close, blinds drawn, refusing to answer knocks. I never stopped looking for Tiffany. I checked obituaries every Sunday. I scanned local news broadcasts. I drove past her apartment complex, hoping to see her car in its usual spot. Nothing. She had simply vanished. It was like she'd been erased from existence. Then came the day the world shattered. I'm telling you right now, what happened next revealed a horror beyond anything I could have imagined. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late January. I was counting inventory near the loading dock when a black sedan pulled into the parking lot. Two men in dark suits stepped out, followed by a uniformed police officer. They didn't stop at reception. They walked straight past the empty front desk, straight toward the back of the building, straight into Marcus's office. Through the glass walls, all of us watched. Marcus stood up, his face flushed with indignation. He started shouting, pointing toward the door, clearly ordering them to leave. The detectives didn't flinch. They stood motionless, speaking in calm, measured tones. Then I watched the color drain from Marcus's face. He stopped shouting. His shoulders slumped. He sank into his chair like a man who had just been told he was dying. They talked for almost an hour. Every employee in that building stopped working. We just stood there, frozen, watching through those glass walls. Finally, the detectives emerged. They didn't arrest him that day. They simply nodded to each other and walked out. Marcus slammed his door shut. The blinds snapped closed. He didn't come out for the rest of the day. 2 days later, they returned. This time, they brought reinforcements. We heard the sirens before we saw the lights. 3 squad cars screeched into the parking lot, doors flying open before the vehicles had fully stopped. Officers marched through the front entrance, their footsteps echoing like thunder. They didn't knock on Marcus's door. They kicked it in. Within seconds, he was being dragged out in handcuffs. But he wasn't fighting. He wasn't shouting. He was weeping. A grown man, a business owner, a pillar of the community, sobbing like a terrified child, his legs buckling beneath him as they pulled him toward the squad car. The police shut down the entire facility as a crime scene. Yellow tape went up across the entrance. We were all sent home. I stood in that parking lot for a long time, watching the tape flutter in the cold January wind. And I felt a dread settle into my bones, a dread that went far deeper than the winter chill. What they found at Marcus's house still haunts me. Subscribe now, because everyone needs to hear what monsters are capable of. Here's what came out during the investigation and trial. Tiffany's mother had eventually reported her missing about a week after she disappeared. She hadn't done it sooner because she assumed Tiffany was staying with a boyfriend. The police spent weeks trying to trace her, and eventually, witnesses came forward placing Marcus's car near Tiffany's apartment complex on the night she vanished. But the details that emerged during the trial, those were the things nightmares are made of. On that rainy Friday night in November, Marcus followed Tiffany home from work. He kept his distance, his headlights cutting through the storm behind her. On a quiet stretch of highway, about 2 miles from her apartment, he made his move. He ran her off the road. He pulled her from her wrecked car at gunpoint. He forced her into his vehicle and drove her to his house, a large, isolated farmhouse about 10 miles outside of town. Marcus was a bachelor. He lived completely alone. He took Tiffany into his basement. The police report said he kept her there for 3 days. When investigators searched his house after that initial interview, they found the evidence that sealed his fate. Hidden under the mattress in his master bedroom, they discovered a coil of thick rope and a shirt that belonged to Tiffany. The shirt was stained with her blood. But the basement was where the real horror waited. It was unfinished. Dirt floor. Bare concrete walls. No windows. The kind of space that swallowed sound. In the center of that room sat a heavy wooden chair. It was bolted directly into the concrete floor. The seat and legs of that chair were stained dark brown, the unmistakable color of dried blood. And surrounding the chair, etched deep into the concrete, were scratch marks. Grooves carved by fingernails. By desperate, clawing fingers. Marks made by someone fighting with everything they had to break free. Marcus confessed to everything after they found that chair. He admitted to holding her captive for 3 days. He admitted to assaulting her repeatedly. And when he was finished, he strangled her with the rope he'd hidden under his mattress. Then he dug a shallow grave right there in the basement floor, just a few feet from the chair where he'd tortured her, and buried her body. He poured a fresh layer of concrete over the disturbed earth to hide what he'd done. And then, every single day for 2 months, he drove to work. He sat in his office. He drank his coffee. He read his newspaper. He looked me in the eyes and told me Tiffany had quit for personal reasons. All while she lay decomposing beneath the floor of his basement. I quit that job the day Marcus was arrested. I never set foot in that building again. I couldn't look at her empty desk without feeling like the walls were closing in on me. Years later, I still struggle to sleep. I think about that Friday night. I think about waving goodbye to her. I think about sitting on my couch that weekend, watching television, wondering why she wasn't returning my calls. While I was safe and warm at home, she was in that basement, tied to that wooden chair, screaming for help that would never come. I learned something that year, something that fundamentally changed how I see the world. Monsters don't look like monsters. Sometimes they're just the quiet boss in the cheap suit, walking on the balls of his feet, standing too close, waiting patiently for the right moment to lock the door behind you. I don't ignore my instincts anymore. When something feels wrong, truly wrong, in your gut, I run. I don't rationalize. I don't wait to see if it gets better, because I know now that the worst things imaginable can happen to the kindest people. And sometimes they happen right under our noses. If this story hit you as hard as it hit me, leave a comment. Tell me, have you ever ignored a warning sign you wish you hadn't? Now stay with me because the next story is just as terrifying, but this time, the threat was sitting 3 cubicles away from me. There's something deeply unsettling about being inside a corporate office building after dark. During business hours, the space feels alive. Phones ring. Printers hum. Keyboards clatter in a constant rhythm. Coworkers laugh in the break room, complain about deadlines, microwave their lunches. It's mundane, safe, human. But the moment the sun goes down and the last cleaning crew member wheels their cart into the elevator, everything changes. The silence becomes heavy, almost physical. The long hallways stretch out like tunnels leading nowhere. The windows transform into black mirrors, reflecting nothing but your own exhausted face staring back at you. I've always been someone who works better in quiet, so staying late was never unusual for me. I actually preferred it. Fewer distractions, fewer interruptions. Just me and my spreadsheets. My name is Rachel. At the time of this story, I worked as a junior analyst for a mid-sized logistics company. Our office occupied the 4th floor of a typical commercial building. Open floor plan, rows of gray cubicles, glass-walled manager offices arranged along the perimeter like fishbowls. This happened about 2 years ago, November, end of fiscal quarter. Everyone was stressed, working overtime, running on coffee and nervous energy. I decided to stay late on a Thursday to power through a mountain of data without distractions. By 8:30, the office was nearly deserted. The only other person left was a guy named Kevin. Kevin sat about 3 rows away from my cubicle. Late 20s. Worked in IT support. He was the kind of guy who blended into the background, quiet, kept to himself, never caused problems. We weren't friends exactly, but we were friendly enough. We'd nod at each other in the hallway, make small talk while waiting for the coffee machine to finish brewing, comment on the weather, maybe complain about the vending machine eating quarters. He seemed completely, utterly ordinary. What I discovered that night proved how wrong first impressions can be. Hit subscribe, you need to hear this. Around 9 o'clock, my eyes started burning from staring at the screen. The numbers were blurring together. I needed a break. I pushed back from my desk, stretched my arms over my head, and decided to walk to the break room for a bottle of water. The main hallway was dim. The motion sensor lights had already timed out, leaving only the soft green glow of emergency exit signs and the distant orange tint of streetlights filtering through the windows. Here's the thing about being a woman alone in a large, empty building at night. You're always a little on edge. Even if you know the place inside and out. Even if you've walked these halls 1,000 times. There's a primal part of your brain that stays alert, scanning for shadows, listening for sounds that don't belong. I hugged my cardigan around my shoulders and walked past the rows of empty desks, my footsteps muffled by the industrial carpet. As I approached the row of executive offices near the end of the hall, I stopped. Our branch manager, I'll call him Henderson, had the corner office. Biggest space on the floor, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows and an intimidating oak desk. Henderson was a loud, boisterous man. The kind of boss who made jokes at other people's expense and laughed loudest at his own humor. His office door was always locked after hours. But that night, as I walked past, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. Just a few inches. Barely noticeable. I froze. I'd watched Henderson leave around 4:30. He'd been carrying his golf bag, whistling on his way to the elevator. He wasn't here. I stood motionless, listening. Then I heard it. A soft scuffing sound, like a shoe dragging slowly against carpet. It was coming from inside the office. "Hello," My voice came out thin and shaky, too loud in the oppressive silence. No response. The scuffing stopped immediately. Every logical part of my brain screamed at me to walk away. Go back to my desk. Call security. Don't investigate strange noises in dark rooms like some horror movie victim. But curiosity, that stupid, dangerous human impulse, pulled me forward. I reached out and pushed the door open wider. I should have walked away. If you've ever had a gut feeling that saved your life, drop a comment below. Because what I saw in that office still makes my blood run cold. The office was dark, but the city lights streaming through the open blinds cast everything in a pale, silvery glow. Someone was standing behind Henderson's desk. I gasped and fumbled for the light switch. The fluorescent lights flickered once, twice, then flooded the room with harsh white brightness. Kevin. He was standing directly behind the manager's leather chair. Not in front of it, not beside it, behind it, positioned as if someone were sitting there and he'd walked up from behind. He was wearing blue latex gloves, the kind the cleaning crew uses. And in his right hand, he was gripping a heavy brass letter opener, the decorative one Henderson kept on his desk as a paperweight. It was thick, with a pointed blade, more weapon than office supply. Our eyes met. Kevin didn't move. He just stood there, frozen like a deer caught in headlights. His face was sweaty. His normally neat hair was disheveled. His shirt was partially untucked, as if he'd been moving around or practicing something. Kevin, my voice barely worked. What are you doing? For 5 agonizing seconds, he said nothing. The silence pressed down on us like a physical weight. I was acutely aware of the letter opener in his hand, the latex gloves on his fingers, the fact that we were completely alone on this floor, possibly in the entire building. Then something shifted in his expression. The tension drained from his shoulders. He let out a breathy, nervous laugh, the kind of laugh that sounds rehearsed. Oh man! He dropped the letter opener onto the desk with a loud clatter. You got me, Rachel. Got you. He peeled off the blue gloves and stuffed them into his pocket. He walked around the desk toward me, and I instinctively took a step backward, keeping space between us. I was trying to scare you. He smiled, but his eyes stayed flat. Cold. Watchful. I saw you get up to go to the break room. Figured you'd walk past here. I was going to jump out, yell, just a stupid prank. I stared at him. In Henderson's office? How did you even get in? Cleaning crew left it unlocked. The answer came too quickly. I just slipped in. Come on, Rachel. It was just a joke. You should have seen your face. He laughed again, but it sounded hollow. Forced. And the gloves? He patted his pocket. Found them on the cleaning cart. Didn't want to leave fingerprints everywhere and get in trouble. You know how Henderson is about his stuff. On the surface, his explanation was plausible. We were tired, working late, bored. Maybe he really was just blowing off steam with an elaborate prank. But my gut was screaming. You don't put on latex gloves and stand in the dark with a sharp object just to jump out at a coworker who might wander by. Normal people don't rehearse scares behind empty chairs like they're blocking a scene. Well, I kept my voice carefully neutral. You definitely scared me. Yeah. Kevin walked past me toward the hallway. He paused at the door and looked back. Hey, don't mention this to Henderson, okay? He'd lose his mind if he knew I was in here. Sure. I nodded. I won't say anything. Cool. Thanks. I'm gonna head out. See you tomorrow. He grabbed his backpack from his cubicle and walked to the elevators. He didn't even bother shutting down his computer. I waited until I heard the elevator ding, until the doors slid shut, until the silence confirmed he was gone. Then I walked into Henderson's office. I didn't touch anything. I just looked. The chair was pulled out slightly from the desk. The letter opener lay on the blotter, catching the light. Everything seemed normal, but something felt deeply, viscerally wrong. I grabbed my purse and practically ran to my car. I didn't finish my work that night. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just witnessed something I wasn't supposed to see. The next day, I started noticing things. Things that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Stay with me because this story is far from over. Friday morning, I came in late. I'd barely slept, tossing and turning, replaying the scene in Henderson's office. Kevin was already at his desk when I arrived. He looked up, gave me a casual wave, and went back to typing. Business as usual. Like nothing had happened. Was I overreacting? Maybe it really was just a weird, poorly executed prank. Henderson arrived around 10, loud and cheerful as always. I watched him stride into his office, close the door, settle into his chair. And then I watched Kevin. He wasn't looking at his screen anymore. He was staring over the top of his cubicle wall, his eyes fixed on Henderson's glass door with an expression I couldn't immediately name. Then it clicked. It was hatred. Pure, concentrated, unblinking hatred. That wasn't the face of someone who'd pulled a silly prank. That was the face of someone waiting for something. Planning something. Throughout the day, every time Henderson moved, stepped out for coffee, walked to the copy room, talked to someone in the hallway, Kevin's eyes followed him. At lunch, I sat in my car in the parking lot, trying to decide what to do. Tell someone? Tell them what exactly? That Kevin stood in an office with a letter opener? He had an explanation. I had no proof of anything malicious. I decided to keep my mouth shut, but I made myself a promise. I would never be alone in the office with Kevin again. The weekend passed without incident. Monday came and went. But on Tuesday morning, I walked into chaos. What happened next confirmed everything I feared and revealed how close I came to something unthinkable. Police cars sat in front of the building, lights flashing. Security personnel crowded the lobby. Employees huddled in clusters, whispering frantically to each other. I spotted our receptionist near the coffee cart, her face pale. What's going on? They arrested Kevin. Her voice shook. Right in the parking lot. This morning. My stomach dropped. Arrested him? For what? They found a gun in his car. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. But that's not even the worst part. Apparently he had a whole plan. He was going to do it today. I felt the blood drain from my face. The full story emerged over the next few hours, pieced together from police statements and office whispers. About 3 months before all this happened, our company had thrown a party. I wasn't there, but apparently Kevin had brought a date, a woman named Jessica he'd been seeing for a few weeks. He was serious about her. He'd told people he was thinking about proposing eventually. Henderson had been drinking that night. He made a scene, loud, crude comments about Jessica's appearance. He mocked her dress. He joked that Kevin must be paying her to date a guy like him. Jessica was humiliated. She left the party in tears. A week later, she broke up with Kevin. She told him she couldn't handle the embarrassment, that she didn't want to be associated with his workplace. Kevin didn't snap immediately. That's not how it works with people like him. He let the anger simmer. He let it build. He let it consume him, day by day for months. The police found a journal in his apartment. Detailed entries spanning weeks. A systematic plan to kill Henderson. But here's the part that keeps me awake at night. The part the detective told me during my witness interview. I'd explained the incident from Thursday night. Finding Kevin in the office. The gloves. The letter opener. The excuse about a prank. The detective's expression turned grim. You said he was standing behind the desk? Behind the chair? Yes. And he had the letter opener in his hand? Yes. The detective sighed and closed his notebook. He wasn't there to prank you, ma'am. We found marks on the underside of Henderson's chair. Someone had been loosening the bolts that connect the seat to the base. They also tampered with the tension spring. Why? I asked, confused. He wanted the chair to feel unstable, to make Henderson uncomfortable. But that wasn't the main plan. The detective paused, choosing his next words carefully. That night, he wasn't there to loosen bolts. He was practicing. Practicing? Rehearsing the movement. Testing exactly how much force it would take to drive that letter opener through the back of the chair, into someone sitting in it. He was calculating the angle. He wanted it to be efficient. My hands started trembling. The gloves he was wearing? They weren't about avoiding fingerprints on the furniture. He'd coated the handle of the letter opener in a resin compound to improve his grip. If you hadn't walked in that night. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. If I hadn't walked in, Kevin might have waited until the next morning. He might have stood behind Henderson's chair while the man was reading emails, drinking coffee, completely unaware. But there was something else. Something the detective said next that stopped my heart. When you confronted him that night, you were standing in the doorway. He was standing between you and the only exit. He had a sharp metal object in his hand. He was running on adrenaline and obsessive rage. The detective looked at me with something close to pity. If you had pushed him, if you had threatened to call security or accused him of something, I don't think he would have let you leave that office. I sat there, unable to speak. For 5 minutes in that dark room, I had been the only witness to a dress rehearsal for murder. And the person rehearsing it had been 3 cubicles away from me for months. Quiet. Polite. Normal. I don't work late anymore. I don't investigate strange noises in empty buildings. And I never, ever forget that you have no idea what's happening inside the mind of the person sitting near you. They might be answering emails, or they might be counting down the days. If this story made you reconsider the people around you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Now stay with me for the final story, because this one doesn't stay at the office. This one follows the victim home. A few years ago, I took a job at a massive distribution center in the Midwest. Picture one of those sprawling warehouses that seem to stretch on forever, endless rows of metal racking reaching toward the ceiling, forklifts beeping as they navigate narrow aisles, the constant electronic chirp of handheld scanners. The air always smelled like cardboard and industrial cleaner. The pay was decent. The hours were brutal. The turnover rate was astronomical. People burned out and quit within months, replaced by the next wave of desperate workers. I kept my head down, did my job, and tried not to get involved in drama. The work itself wasn't bad, actually. I found a rhythm to it, a kind of meditative flow in picking orders and loading pallets. But as anyone who's ever worked in a warehouse knows, management can make or break your entire existence. Unfortunately for me, I was assigned to a supervisor named Brenda. Brenda wasn't just a difficult boss. She was a predator dressed in polyester. A bully who selected specific targets and tormented them systematically until they either quit in tears or had breakdowns on the warehouse floor. I just didn't know yet that I was about to become her next victim. Subscribe now and turn on notifications, because what this woman did to me escalated into something you won't believe. My introduction to Brenda's true nature came during my second week. I was sitting in the break room during lunch, eating a sandwich and scrolling through my phone, minding my own business. The double doors suddenly burst open with a bang. Brenda came barreling through like a freight train. Her face was bright red, veins bulging in her neck. She marched directly up to a guy named Tony, who was quietly trying to drink his coffee. She got in his face, inches from his nose, and started screaming. I don't mean she raised her voice. I mean she was screaming profanities at full volume, spit flying with every word. Something about a pallet being stacked incorrectly, but the actual offense was completely disproportionate to her reaction. It was like watching a feral animal attack. Tony sat there frozen, his coffee cup shaking in his hands. Everyone else in the break room stared down at their tables, terrified to make eye contact with Brenda, terrified of becoming her next target. That should have been my sign to run. But I needed the money, so I stayed. Brenda's office was a little glass box right on the warehouse floor, visible to everyone. She had a terrible habit of leaving her door wide open while gossiping loudly about employees' personal problems, divorces, financial struggles, health issues. She discussed these private matters in full hearing of anyone walking past. It created this toxic atmosphere of paranoia. Nobody trusted anyone because they knew their secrets might be broadcast next. One day, I made a critical mistake. I was talking to another supervisor, a nice guy named Miguel, and I casually mentioned that Brenda's open-door gossiping made me uncomfortable. I wasn't filing a complaint or anything. I was just venting to someone I thought was trustworthy. Bad move. Brenda found out. I still don't know if Miguel told her or if she was lurking around a corner listening. But the next day, everything changed. I became her new project. What happened over the next 6 months turned my life into a waking nightmare. Hit like if you've ever had a boss who made you dread going to work. The torment started subtly, or as subtly as Brenda was capable of. The gossip began happening in front of me. I'd walk into her office to grab a manifest, and she'd make a big show of rolling her eyes at whoever she was talking to. She'd say things like, "And then you have people who think they're too good to sweep the floor," while staring directly at me. Then came the nickname. I was paged to the front office one afternoon. As I approached, I heard Brenda on the phone. She hadn't realized I was already within earshot. "Yeah, the rat is coming down now," she said, then looked up and saw me standing there. She didn't apologize. She didn't even look embarrassed. She just hung up and smirked. From that day forward, I heard whispers of the rat every time I walked down the aisles. Other employees had picked it up. Whether out of fear of Brenda or genuine cruelty, I never found out. The passive aggression intensified. If I asked a question about my work, she'd let out a long, dramatic sigh, like I was the stupidest person she'd ever encountered. When I needed a supervisor override code on my scanner, something that literally stopped me from doing my job until she approved it, she'd ignore me. I'd stand there for 10 or 15 minutes while she played on her phone or chatted with someone. Then she'd write me up for time theft, because I hadn't been working. It was maddening. She was sabotaging me and then punishing me for the consequences of her sabotage. But then things took a darker turn. The psychological stuff. One afternoon, I was in the employee locker room changing out of my work shoes. It was just the two of us, me on a bench, Brenda at her locker across the room. Suddenly, I heard a low, guttural sound. I looked up. In the mirror, I could see Brenda behind me. She was staring at the back of my head with this intense, focused expression. And she was growling. Literally growling. Like a dog warning you not to come closer. I spun around shocked. "Excuse me?" She stopped. She didn't say a word, didn't offer any explanation. She just slammed her locker shut and walked out of the room. I stood there with my heart pounding, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. But I hadn't. This is where things got truly disturbing. Drop a comment if you've ever encountered someone who made you feel genuinely unsafe. Another incident happened a few days later. I went to Brenda's desk to drop off some paperwork. She was sitting behind her computer, and when she saw me approaching, she picked up a stack of papers and held them in front of her face. Not like she was reading them, like she was using them as a shield, so she wouldn't have to look at me. But here's the unsettling part. She left a gap between the papers. And through that gap, I could see one of her eyes staring at me. Not glancing. Staring. Frantically, intensely staring. The eye moved, following me as I set down the paperwork. I walked away with my skin crawling. This wasn't normal workplace conflict anymore. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong with this woman. The breaking point came during a performance review. She pulled me into her office, closed the door, and told me I needed to significantly improve my work or face termination. "I pulled my own numbers, Brenda," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm the second most productive picker in the entire department. I have the second lowest error rate." She smiled. That cold, dead smile that never reached her eyes. "Numbers can be manipulated. Your attitude is the problem." A week later, she pushed me over the edge. She cornered me on the warehouse floor, right out in the open, and began berating me in front of two other supervisors and the facility manager. She was screaming that I was useless, calling me the rat, saying I was a waste of payroll. The facility manager stood there looking uncomfortable, but said nothing. Did nothing. I'd already reported Brenda's behavior to him privately. He'd promised to look into it. Clearly, that meant nothing. Something inside me broke. I felt the tears coming and couldn't stop them. I threw my scanner on the ground and walked away, hyperventilating, half blind from crying. I was ready to walk off the job forever. But someone was watching out for me. A quiet older woman who worked in packing had witnessed the whole scene. She followed me to my car and sat with me while I cried. Then she did something I didn't have the courage to do myself. She called the corporate ethics hotline. She managed to get the regional manager on the phone, the person above our facility manager, above everyone at our location. The regional manager called me directly that evening and asked me to explain everything. For the first time, I told the whole story. Every incident, every name I'd been called, every time I'd been sabotaged and then punished. The growling, the staring, all of it. An official HR investigation was launched that went straight to the top, bypassing local management entirely. Brenda was given a final warning. I told the HR representative, "She won't last a month." I was right. 3 weeks later, Brenda had another explosive confrontation with a different employee. This time, it became physical. Security had to physically intervene to separate them. She was suspended immediately and then formally terminated. I later learned she'd been directly responsible for at least 3 employees quitting before me, and one person getting fired because they'd finally snapped and thrown their work gloves at her face out of desperation. I thought the nightmare was finally over. I thought I could move on with my life. But this is where the story stops being about a toxic boss and becomes about survival. Stay with me, because what happened next put me in genuine danger. About a week after Brenda was fired, strange things started happening. It began with my car. I usually parked in the back of the massive employee lot, near a light pole for safety. One night after a shift that ended around 2 in the morning, I walked out to find my driver's side mirror smashed inward. No note. No other damage. Just the mirror, hanging by its wires like someone had stomped on it. I told myself maybe a truck had clipped it while maneuvering through the lot. But the angle was wrong. It looked intentional. A few days later, I was working overtime. Late shift skeleton crew. The warehouse is eerie at night. Motion sensor lights click off in empty aisles, leaving huge patches of darkness between the towering racks. I was picking an order in a remote section near the back of the building. Aisle 40. Far from the loading dock, far from everyone else. Then I heard a scanner beep. I froze. I was the only person assigned to this sector. The rest of the night crew was on the loading dock, a 5-minute walk away. Beep. It came from the next aisle over. Hello. My voice echoed off the metal racks. Silence. Then I heard heavy boots dragging slowly across the concrete floor. I abandoned my cart and crept to the end of the rack, peering around the corner into the adjacent aisle. Empty. But at the far end, near the fire exit, I saw the heavy steel door slowly swinging closed. Click. I told security. They checked the cameras, walked the perimeter, found nothing. They chalked it up to a draft. But I knew what I'd heard. Someone had been there. Someone had been watching me. What happened next confirmed my worst fears. Like this video if you're scared for me right now, because it gets much worse. 2 nights later, I drove home around 2:30 in the morning. My rental house was about 20 minutes from the warehouse, down a quiet suburban road. As I pulled into my driveway, my headlights swept across the front porch. Something was sitting on my welcome mat. I stayed in the car, doors locked, engine running. I squinted through the windshield, heart pounding. A cardboard box. I recognized the specific branding on the packing tape. It was from the warehouse. I grabbed the pepper spray attached to my keychain and slowly approached the porch, ready to run at the first sign of movement. The box was sealed. Written on top in thick black marker was one word. Rat. I didn't open it. I kicked it off the porch and ran inside, locking every deadbolt, checking every window. I called the police. They filed a report but said without a direct threat or video of who left it, there wasn't much they could do. The next morning, I forced myself to open the box. Inside was garbage. Old coffee cups, candy wrappers, trash from the warehouse break room. But buried in the middle was a printout of my employee photo, the one from my ID badge. The eyes had been scratched out with a pen, scratched so violently that the paper was torn through, leaving ragged holes where my eyes should have been. Brenda. She knew where I lived. She must have pulled my personnel file before being escorted out of the building. For the next week, I barely slept. I wedged a chair under my bedroom doorknob every night. I jumped at every sound. Then came the night everything came to a head. This is the part that still haunts me. The part that makes me check my locks twice before bed. It was my day off. I was alone in my kitchen making tea around 9 o'clock at night. The blinds were open. Outside, total darkness. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I opened the text message. You think you won? Before I could even process what I was reading, another message came through. Look outside. I dropped the phone. My eyes shot to the window above the sink. The kitchen light behind me turned the glass into a mirror. I could see my own reflection, but nothing outside, which meant anyone outside could see directly into my kitchen while I was completely blind to them. I dropped to the floor and crawled to the light switch, killing the overhead light. In the sudden darkness, I crept back to the counter and raised my head just enough to peer through the window. Across the street, a car was idling. Lights off. Just sitting there. I recognized the shape. A beat-up red sedan. Brenda's car. My hands shaking, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. Someone is outside my house, I whispered to the dispatcher. My former supervisor. She's been stalking me. She's across the street right now. Stay on the line with me, ma'am. Officers are being dispatched. Can you describe? The car door opened. I watched as a silhouette stepped out. The interior dome light didn't come on. She must have disabled it. The figure was wearing a dark hoodie, pulled up over their head. They started walking across the street, toward my house. She's coming, I told the dispatcher, my voice cracking. She's walking toward my door. Please hurry. Officers are 2 minutes away. I need you to lock yourself in a room with no windows. Stay on the line. I ran to the hallway bathroom and locked the door behind me, climbing into the bathtub, pressing myself against the cold porcelain. The phone trembled against my ear. Then I heard it. Heavy footsteps on the wooden porch stairs. Bang, bang, bang. Someone was pounding on my front door. I know you're in there, rat. It was her. Brenda's voice, but wrong. Slurred. Unhinged. Open the door. I lost everything because of you. She started kicking. I heard the wood splintering. My front door was old. The frame wasn't strong. Each kick sounded like a gunshot. I was sobbing silently, praying the lock would hold. Then, the sound of glass shattering. She'd moved to the living room window. I heard curtains being torn down, furniture crashing over. She was inside my house. "Come out, little rat." Her voice echoed through the rooms. "I can smell you. I can smell your fear." Heavy boots stomped down the hallway. She was checking rooms, getting closer. The footsteps stopped directly outside the bathroom door. I held my breath. The doorknob jiggled. "I know you're in there." That same low, guttural growl from the locker room, but louder now. More feral. "Come out and play with me." She threw her body weight against the door. The wood cracked. I screamed. She slammed against it again. And then sirens. Blue and red lights flooded through the small bathroom window, painting the walls in spinning color. "No!" Brenda shrieked. I heard commotion in the hallway. Police radios crackling. Shouting. "Get on the ground. Show me your hands. Now." A struggle. Brenda screaming obscenities. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut. Then finally a calm voice. "Ma'am, you can come out now. You're safe." It took me 10 minutes to unlock the bathroom door. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't grip the lock. When I finally walked out, my living room was destroyed. Window shattered. TV smashed. Couch overturned. And lying on the hallway floor, just a few feet from the bathroom door, was a kitchen knife. She'd grabbed it from my counter. Brenda was arrested and charged with breaking and entering, stalking, terroristic threats, and possession of a deadly weapon with intent to cause harm. The police told me she'd been parked on my street for 3 consecutive nights before that final confrontation. Just sitting there in the darkness. Watching. Waiting for me to be alone. I quit that job 2 days later. I packed up my life and moved to a different apartment complex across town. One with a security gate, cameras, and better locks. I heard through former co-workers that Brenda took a plea deal. She spent some time in a psychiatric facility and a few months in county jail. I don't know where she is now. I don't want to know. But sometimes at my new job, when someone raises their voice unexpectedly, when I hear a scanner beep in a quiet aisle, I freeze. My heart races. I have to remind myself to breathe. And every time I walk into a locker room, I check the mirrors, just to make sure no one is watching me from behind. 3 stories. 3 ordinary workplaces. 3 people who seemed completely normal until the day they revealed the darkness hiding inside them. The quiet business owner who walked on the balls of his feet and buried a young woman beneath his basement floor. The IT guy 3 cubicles away who rehearsed a murder while everyone assumed he was just another harmless introvert. The supervisor who growled like an animal, then broke through a window with a knife, hunting the employee who dared to report her. They were all hiding in plain sight. The lesson I took from these experiences is simple. Trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, when your gut is screaming at you to run, even though you can't articulate why, listen to it. Don't rationalize. Don't wait to see if things improve. Don't convince yourself you're overreacting. Because sometimes, the worst things imaginable are happening right in front of us. And sometimes, the monster is the person smiling at you over the cubicle wall. If these stories changed how you see the people around you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We share true stories like these every week, stories that might save your life. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever had a terrifying experience with a coworker, a boss, or someone you thought you could trust? I want to hear your story. Stay safe out there. Lock your doors. And always, always trust your gut.